Hello, I am Jessica Webb at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children at Western University. On behalf of the Knowledge Hub team, welcome to the Knowledge Hub Presents. The Knowledge Hub Presents series features information on trauma and violence-informed research and practice developed by members of the trauma-informed community of practice in their work related to preventing and addressing family violence. We acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape-Wak, and the Attawandaron peoples, on lands connected with the London Township Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. With this, we respect the longstanding relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land, as they are the original caretakers. We acknowledge the historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous people endure in Canada. We accept responsibility as a public institution and to contribute towards revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through teaching, research, and community service. Given that the Knowledge Hub is grounded in trauma and violence-informed health promotion, we acknowledge the intergenerational trauma and resiliency that has resulted from the colonial agenda and the genocidal projects of residential schools, day schools, Indian hospitals in both the 60s and Millennium Scoop. We commit to centering these experiences as we do our work. Today, we are so happy to be joined by Dr. Gifty Asare. Gifty is a doctoral candidate of psychology and neuroscience at York University. She completed her master's in psychiatry at McGill University and a bachelor's in neuroscience at Concordia University. Her expertise is in neuroimaging and neuroclinical interventions in younger and older adults. She has previously worked as a neurofeedback and biofeedback technician, aiding in the rehabilitation of TBI survivors. She was Women at the Center's chapter's co-chair, supporting women identifying survivors of GBV on campus. Currently, she is a research lead for Women at the Center's Cross-Sectoral Solutions, strengthening community capacity to address the parallel pandemic of GBV and TBI through a survivor-led support program that aims to support GBV-TBI survivors across Canada. And with that, I turn it over to you, Dr. Gifty.
Thank you so much, Jess. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being present here. Thank you to the Knowledge Hub organizers and you, the listeners that are here to share space today. So in the brief time that we have together, I look forward to sharing some findings about how a survivor-led program can be supportive to survivors of gender-based violence living with a traumatic brain injury. And I'm just going to ensure that everyone is able to see a screen and slides. So far, it looks like that is the case, which is great. Perfect. And you can hear. Wonderful. All right. And so these findings are part of a 3-year project funded by the Public Health of Canada, and it was conducted by Women at the Center. I just want to get us situated, though, before I begin today with a quote. "One death is a tragedy. A million is a statistic." So this quote is important to get us situated because it signifies how a single life, even if not reflected in large numbers, holds immense weight and impact. And so while statistics, measured outcomes, deliverable metrics can provide a broad overview of program impacts and effectiveness, they often fail to capture individual declarations and profound impacts of a single life. And that makes it crucial for us to consider the human element beyond mere numbers. And so I encourage us all to remember that statistics represent real people with individual experiences, and it should not be used to devalue the worth of a single life or to discount a single lived experience. So with that, in our brief time together, I hope to share how peer support services, flexible programming, under a survivor-led framework is impactful, and then how these learnings can be mobilized and sustained and also help build community. In this project, we co-adapted, piloted, evaluated a 20-week pilot program so we could identify what works for survivors of gender-based violence living with a brain injury. So we had identified existing gaps through literature and research reviews, and we knew that we needed a program that was survivor-led, that was evidence-based, trauma-informed, multi-sectoral, and flexible. So I know that was a lot of language, but really it was to highlight flexibility to ensure that it would improve overall health and well-being of survivors. And so during the 20 weeks, this was from May to September of 2024, we offered 8 services, administered 6 surveys, a focus group or interview to 25 survivors across Canada. And here on the screen, we can see the services that were offered. They were offered at different time points during the program. And so it was sort of like a service buffet where survivors could pick and choose which ones they wanted to attend to and which ones they wanted to participate in. Some of these sessions were recorded as well, so participants could attend to them at their leisure. One-on-one peer counseling was a little different. That was offered on an ad hoc basis and asynchronously. So survivors were assigned a peer navigator that they could meet as frequently as they needed. The other services had a relatively fixed number of sessions, ranging from 4, so that would be naturopathy and OT, to 32, which were the psychotherapy sessions. Before the program, we wanted to know who the survivors were, if they knew how they had sustained their brain injury, their current health status, the knowledge of gender-based violence and brain injury, and what their needs and goals were. So clearly, we really wanted to get to know these survivors on a deeper level, and we asked them quite a few questions about who they were. During the 20 weeks, we had 4 interim surveys to see how the program was or wasn't supporting all of these areas. And at the end of the pilot, we had a post survey asking to know how things had changed from the initial survey. We also provided survey supports in the form of a dedicated staff member to walk through the survey if needed. The survey was offered in French and English, and survivors could use audio or video recorded responses to answer if they didn't want to type in their responses. And so all of this really supported in getting a near perfect response rate. And so we saw that survivors really engaged with the surveys and that it was accessible. We also offered survivors opportunity to share and expand further on their experiences through the program. And so this was in the form of a focus group or an interview. This was with the hopes of addressing the gaps that might not necessarily have been captured during the program, but also giving an opportunity for more community building among survivors. This was at the end, so it also facilitated closure, recognizing that survivors might have some feelings with regards to this program coming to an end that they might want to share with peers, with fellow survivors, but then also just with program members at large. And so we asked, well, what did they enjoy about this 5-month program? What did they not enjoy? Did it address the different aspects of their identity, like their gender, ethnicity, disability, and other factors in a safe way? Did they learn anything? And then what their hope was for the sector, for supports, and what their dreams were, whether personal or larger or overall with regards to community. And so now we look at who the survivors were, so some demographics. So we had 25 survivors across Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, BC, and Northwest Territories. Survivors were mainly between the ages of 25 and 59. A fifth of them identified as newcomers, so that means they were in Canada for 5 years or less, with one identifying as a refugee. Survivors were mainly women, and we had one Two-Spirit and one Audi-gendered individual. It's also worth noting that we had 3 survivors that identified as Indigenous, and 7 as Black. So happy Black History Month. It was comforting to note that in a small cohort, nearly 30% identified as Black, because in this sector, we're keenly aware that there is an overrepresentation of both Indigenous and Black survivors. However, there is underrepresentation with regards to supports and service access. And that continues to be the reality, and it was captured here as well. And so it is imperative that there are outreach efforts, safer spaces, and representative care so that there's enhanced reach to both communities. I think as a Black female researcher, I've been keenly aware of the lack of representation, not only in research, but also in care. And so having Black occupational therapist or speech language pathologist or physiotherapist, which presents as a barrier to other communities, specifically that of Indigenous communities and that of Black communities. And so we look at some of the findings regards to the impacts of the program on overall health and well-being. And on this slide here, we can see that general health slightly improved at a rate of 4% overall between week 0 and week 20. And the scale here was a scale of 1 to 5, where survivors were asked to rate their general health, which included emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental health. Mental health had a more significant increase during the program. And so mental health increased to 34%. So we see a steady incline across the weeks, a steady increase, across the weeks, where participants went from about poor to fairly good to very good with regards to how they rated their mental health over the 20 weeks. And so that was very encouraging. But we also wanted to look at the tangible impacts of that health increase. And so here on the screen, we see in blue and purple the 2 lines representing overall health and mental health. But we also see the green line that's steadily going down. That represents the difficulty to complete tasks. And so on the left-hand side, survivors were rating the difficulty to complete tasks on a scale of 1 to 4, from not difficult at all to extremely difficult. And there was an 11% decrease in the difficulty to complete tasks such as cooking, cleaning, getting dressed, or working on projects, creating an agenda. And so it was enlightening to know that not only are these directly linked to health improvements, but they're also heavily impacted by symptoms like fatigue, headache, and lack of sleep, which we'll take a closer look at. So in the cohort of survivors that participated in the program, 21 out of 23 reported that gender-based violence was the root cause of their brain injury. Some of the reasons were a hit to the head, strangulation, choking, shaking, punching, substance use abuse. And looking more closely at those symptoms, at the symptoms related to those root causes, we can see just how detrimental these causes are to an individual, especially when they're suffering from this slew or this host of symptoms. And so that includes sleep disturbance, fatigue, headache and migraines, sensitivity to light and noise, neck pain, numbness and tingling, so forth and so on. And here on this chart in blue, we have at week 0, the number of individuals that reported having these symptoms. And then at week 20, the decrease in the number of individuals that expressed having these symptoms as well. And so all the symptoms showed a slight to moderate decline in frequency from the start to the end of the program, except blurred vision. And we also looked at symptom severity. And so on a scale of 2 to 5, really, looking from mildly severe to most severe, what is the impact of these symptoms? to survivors. And we can see that, one, it's worth noting that it's between fair and very severe, which means that the severity of these is quite detrimental and crucial, but it does decline across the 20 weeks. And so overall, we saw a 19% decrease in symptom frequency and an 11% decrease in symptom severity. We also looked at knowledge and understanding around gender-based violence and brain injury. And what we found there was that survivors had a pretty good understanding of gender-based violence. It was relatively very good. There was improvement across the 20 weeks, a 12% increase. The knowledge of brain injury was lesser and it showed a sharper increase. And so that's the blue line where there was 46% improvement in knowledge around brain injury. And this was very supportive for the coping strategies that survivors said they gained in the program. And so coping strategies is the line in purple, and that was even lesser. But it increased to around the same threshold as the knowledge of gender-based violence and brain injury, suggesting that as the knowledge of brain injury increased, so did the coping strategies increase with regards to what survivors could do to support themselves, with regards to how they would deal with their symptoms, as well as their pain management. And we'll see kind of some quotes with regards to how survivors found that to be supportive. So now I want to share some of the findings with regards to the focus group results, and more importantly as well, just what survivors stated experiencing throughout the program. And so this can be categorized into 4 broad themes that include positive and constructive feedback, as well as survivors' key takeaways and their hopes and aspirations. So looking at positive feedback, these are when survivors kind of described positive sentiments and self-reported improvements across different areas. And there were 5 main areas: strength-based, judgment-free, social location, peer navigator, and trauma response with regards to positive feedback. And here I just took a few declarations that survivors shared with regards to some of these sub-themes. And so with strength-based, the survivor says, SH says, I think I appreciated that it was very self-led. If you wanted to engage, you could. If not, you didn't have to. Judgment-free, RI says, it's always a non-judgmental stance that we are all unique in our experiences of TBI. CW shared, I like how this includes all women that are like myself, with trauma and all these different types of issues that we've had. So I really appreciate the inclusivity and the respect I was given here. And then SH says, with regards to peer navigator, my peer navigator, the best, top notch, amazing. Words can't express how much she has poured into me. And I want to share that peer navigator positive feedback was number 1 and was the most highlighted. And it was very encouraging and honestly, like just a wealth of joy to read how supportive peer navigation was for survivors. But also very important is knowing what gaps existed and where there is room for improvement. And so looking at constructive feedback, there was time constraints. I just wish it was longer. That's all, which also encouraging because that means survivors wanted to spend more time with us. KA says, I mean, it might be different for other participants, but when I started the program, I had just left my domestic violence situation. So this speaks to survivors being at different parts of their journey and therefore having accommodations for folks coming to a program and maybe coming or requiring different needs at different times, depending on where they are in their healing journey. And then AC mentioned, I realized that it was hard hearing other people's stories. And so how being in a space with survivors can sometimes be triggering because folks are vulnerable in sharing their experiences, but how that could also be a reminder of someone else's trauma. Survivor key takeaways included strategies and tools. MG says we were able to find effective ways to relieve the symptoms due to the traumatic brain injury, earplugs to reduce noise, dimming the screen lights, physiotherapy for neck pain, reorganizing my lifestyle for healthier care, better confidence, and self-esteem. RE says, you guys make me feel that I have a voice and that I do matter as a person. And you guys gave me back my self-confidence, which I didn't have before. And RM shares, it's also so heartening or motivating that there's life after gender-based violence, just life after TBI. Additionally, we encourage hopes and aspiration to be shared, which is important also so that survivors feel that there is continuity and longevity after the program. And so all that they've experienced and learned doesn't just end after 20 weeks, but it speaks to the sustainability and the impacts of the program. So, mention of community building. I would love to see mentorship where we're all able to train for similar roles or to volunteer in the program, TI says. I want there to be supports that are more readily available and not so stigmatized, and also supports that come in all many different formats, like in person or virtually or on the telephone. And that's what RE said about additional modalities. And then lastly, AP mentioned, I would love to see more programming like this. And so, all in all, this was very encouraging with regards to the findings of the quantitative and the qualitative findings that came together to tell a larger narrative. And that is survivor-led programming shares how survivors of gender-based violence and TBI are well informed on the services that they find supportive. It's worth noting that we had WeSec, which is Women at the Center Survivor Expert Collective. And so when we say survivor-led, this was a group of survivors that are living at the intersection of gender-based violence and TBI, informing the entire program. And the program was live adapted. And so we are taking feedback in real time to ensure that the program was essentially fulfilling the needs that were shared and expressed in real time as well. And so that flexibility, along with the dedicated one-on-one peer navigation, definitely increased not only knowledge, but also health and helped relieve symptoms and supported overall well-being, care, growth, and then my personal favorite, hope. And so with that, I would like to share more about this entire project, but 15 minutes is not enough time to do so. So thankfully, when we have colleagues that are going to be presenting next week, kind of part two with regards to capacity building. And then we also have a conference happening, a conference that's kind of going to share a lot of what the entire project and initiative did, and that's March 3rd to 5th. And in this, we'll also be able to share more about the research findings because we also looked at needs and financial aids, and we looked at hope in more detail. And so I look forward to sharing that with everyone. Thank you.
So can you remind us what programs the participants were offered when they joined the study? They know that you mentioned OT and some somatic therapy. And then which of any of those programs did you notice to be more helpful for TBI survivors?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So the services were occupational therapy, speech language pathology. We had music therapy, naturopathy, somatic therapy. I think we call that Sensing Sundays, psychotherapy, as well as yoga. And the attendance for each of these varied. And so we kind of have a detailed breakdown, but I can say, without going, I guess, into too much detail, because I don't have that opportunity, that 52% of survivors went to one-on-one peer counseling the most. And the least that survivors attended to were naturopathy and yoga. And now them going to these sessions like at a lesser frequency is not necessarily because they didn't enjoy them as much or they weren't helpful, but sometimes it could really just be due to the availability of these sessions, and also just how much of it we offered in the program. And so that hopefully helps a little bit. But for looking at like which were helpful, it would depend for what, when, and where. And so that requires maybe a little bit more of a breakdown. But overall, one-on-one peer counseling was most helpful.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have lots of questions about the program, and as Gifty mentioned, part two will happen next week with Gifty's colleagues, and so you can register for that on the website. And for now, the last question we have is if there is a written report that that viewer participants can read, or if it's coming, or what some kind of updates are on and any resources that are available.
Yeah, definitely. There will be a written report in the future. Right now, we're working more on like different presentations and conferences, and so that's where most of the information will be shared. But we are working on a knowledge kind of hub or a resource or website where all of this information, including infographics, articles, and reports, will be housed. And so we look forward to sharing that with folks as well.
Great. We love that name.
I wonder why.
Okay, well, that's great. So you can on the KH Presents page, you can find all the links to follow Dr. Gifty and colleagues at Women at the Center to find those resources and keep updated. So yeah, in the meantime, thanks so much, Gifty, for spending the afternoon with us, and we're so honored. And thanks to everybody who participated, and shout out to everybody who worked behind the scenes, and to our interpreter Sylvie. And we will see you next week at the same time. So
Thank you.
bye for now.
Bye.